Hello and welcome to this month's Fluency Corner lesson. It is a pleasure to be seeing you again. I hope you're feeling ready and excited for this lesson. In this lesson, we'll be talking about some time expressions because this lesson is all about milestones. Now, the word milestone, and there's actually quite a few different words for this, but we'll just be focusing on milestone for this lesson. Milestone just means where you're having a marker in time. So like every mile, there's like a stone for something, that's like marking mile 1, mile 2, mile 3. Like if you're, running a race, you would see every mile, there's a little stone or a little marker there. So a milestone in life just means some, major event that happens to you, like getting your first job or having your first baby or, you're becoming a grandparent or something like that. So all of these things are milestones in your life, and that's why this lesson is all about talking about time expressions, because we're talking about something that happened before or something that will happen in the future, and we're having a lot of great conversational phrases that come up in this lesson set, so I thought it would be a great opportunity to talk about those as well. Before we talk about those, though, I want to go over a bunch of great phrasal verbs. There are a lot more phrasal verbs, and if you're not familiar with phrasal verbs, I use this expression phrasal verb. It just means a group of words that come together to make a more interesting and casual verb. So instead of saying to dismount a horse, that would be the regular verb to dismount something, you would say get off. And the more of these you learn, the more pieces of the words you put together, like get off, get on, so you get off the horse and get on the horse as well. You can learn just like an English-speaking child, which is not learning words like dismount. They're learning how to put words together so you can get off, get on, get to, get for, that kind of thing, and then you can sound much more native. So we'll be going over a few more of the, they're not too complicated, but they're very common and they'll come up in conversations a lot. So let's review those first. Our first phrasal verb is to get around to doing something. I've covered this before, but I thought it was a really great thing to cover again because it's such an important thing, and it's important that you review and not just to look at something once, but to see it many times and from many different angles. So to get around to something is kind of the opposite of getting to something. If you get to something, you get directly to that thing. It's kind of hard to see the view here, but imagine you're looking at it from above like this. You're looking down on something from here. So to get to something means to go directly to that thing. But if you get around to something, to get around to do something means you're not going directly to that thing. You're getting there, but you're not getting directly to that thing, at least not, as quickly as you can. So when you want to get to something, you get to something quickly, or if you're waiting or you're, doing something else, you're getting around to doing it later. So when you get around to doing something, it's usually because you were, waiting or you didn't want to do it. Like a lot of children, they don't want to get to their homework after they get home from school. So they want to get around to it later. So, okay, I'll get around to doing my homework later. And in the conversation, you'll hear my mom talking about happy that, her children are finally getting around to making a baby or having a grandchild for her, to get around to something. Next, two phrasal verbs that are related: to turn out to be something and to turn into something. So we got in and out. To turn out to be just means to happen to become or to kind of naturally become something where you didn't expect it. So maybe we were thinking it was going to be a kind of a rainy day, but it turned out to be a nice day. So it turned out to be a great day. Or I was expecting to do, poorly on my test, but it turned out that I actually did well. So if you think about turning something out, it's kind of like you think about it being one way, but then the opposite happens. So you're turning it out in a different way that you hadn't expected. So it turned out pretty well. It turned out pretty well. I thought I was going to do badly, but it turned out to be pretty well. So the opposite thing happened. The next one is to turn into something else. And to turn into just means to become. So to change from one thing to another. Now these are both, they're fairly related. Turn just means to change or to move slightly. So it's still in the same area. When you turn something, it's not going to a different place. It's just kind of changing slightly. So to turn from a kind of a bad day or a rainy day to turn into a sunny day. So I'm really happy that the weather turned into a sunny day. It turned into a sunny day. It just means it became something else. So we're not changing it. It didn't turn from a sunny day into an alligator. We're changing something slightly. So it's turning into a nice day. It really turned into a nice day. Next, to come along. To come along. Now, in your life, you may be thinking about, I'm doing something right now, but what will come along next? This is a more native and casual and conversational way of saying that what will happen next, what will come along, or what will appear next. So the textbook version would be to appear, and the casual version would be to come along. I was walking down the street and, just having a nice day, and something came along. It just means like physically, like something was moving towards you. It came towards you. So something can physically move towards you, something can physically come along, or something can, in time, come along as well. So you can even talk about your English progress. So maybe many years ago you couldn't speak very well, you couldn't understand, but now your progress is coming along. It's coming along. It's coming along. So it's continuing to improve and getting better and approaching something, to come along. Come along. Next, this is a really great phrase that you may not have heard before, a great phrasal verb, to catch on to something, to catch on to something. Now, if you think about running and you jump and you catch something, when you have to think and you have to react very quickly to catch something, to catch on to something, this means that you're able to understand something. So maybe when I first came to Japan, I couldn't catch on to the language at all, but now I'm starting to catch on. So you'll hear people say, maybe this student is starting to catch on. He's starting to understand what I'm talking about. But it's just a more native and casual way of saying this. To understand, to catch on. So I'm starting to catch on to how, operating a video camera works. So when I first got the camera, I didn't understand how it worked, but I'm starting to catch on now. I hope you're catching on to how to use these lessons. Remember to study with them in different ways. Don't just watch the video. I want you to try teaching things, try writing them, try listening, try speaking along with me. And then as you're, doing that, you'll improve and your English will also start to come along. To come along. It will be coming along. Next, two phrasal verbs that are very closely related, find out and to figure out. Now, find out usually means to discover something, like I found out that my mom was a zookeeper when she was younger. I found that out, so I discovered that information. But I figured out, so figured out means you're actually actively trying to solve a problem. So I figured out, maybe I heard my mom had some interesting job when she was younger, but then I started asking a lot of people, so I'm trying to solve the problem. I'm trying to figure out what she was, and so I finally figured out she was a zookeeper when she was younger. So these two are related, but they're slightly different. Remember that to find out means to discover something, so you're kind of waiting here and you find something out, but when you figure something out, you're going after that thing. You're trying to solve that problem. To find out and to figure out. Next, to be or get mixed up. To be or get mixed up. When you're mixed up about something, you are confused about that thing. So to be mixed up, like your mind is mixed up and you don't know what's happening, you are confused by that thing. Again, these are all just different, more casual, expressive ways of saying the same thing. So we're saying, instead of being, I'm confused by something, I was mixed up. I was mixed up. Or I'm feeling mixed up. Mixed up. Next, to bring up. To bring up. To bring something up is a more casual way of talking about raising something. So I can raise a child, or I can bring a child up. I can bring a child up. It's the exact same thing, but just a more casual and conversational way of saying that. So I am bringing up my child with both English and Japanese. I'm bringing her up, or I am raising her with both English and Japanese. To bring up. To bring up. Next, to keep up. To keep up means to continue. We've got to continue something, or we've got to keep up. So we've got the expression or the sense of keeping up as in, I'm trying to swim at a certain pace. So maybe I want to swim like 1 mile an hour, something like that. And I have to keep up that pace. I have to continue, or I have to keep it at that particular level. So maybe my body will get tired, so I have to keep working. I have to keep up my energy. So if I, eat a good meal every day or every few hours, then I keep up my energy. And if I don't eat, then my energy starts to go down like this. So I have to keep up my energy. To keep up. It just means to continue or to maintain something at a particular level. You can also talk about keeping up your house. So, any physical thing, like even this curtain behind me, after many, many years, if you don't repair it and clean it and wash it, then it will start to fall apart. So you have something like this, it's together as one thing, but it falls apart. And this is just what happens to everything in nature. Our bodies are physical things, so any buildings, they get old, or our clothing, things get old and they fall apart. So if you want to keep up your house, it just means you're fixing things and washing things and maintaining things so they don't continue to fall down. You always have to keeping up your house, to keep up. And the last of our phrasal verbs is to work out. To work out. When you want to say that something worked out, you're saying that it was successful. So you did it the way it should have been done, the way it was supposed to have been done. So I was at a party, and we were worried that we didn't order enough food, but actually it worked out because not that many people came to the party. So we thought like 200 people were coming, but we only got food for 100 people, but only 100 people came. So it worked out. So it was okay. It just means that something was successful, or there kind of wasn't a problem at the end of something. So it all worked out. I was, having a lot of problems with being able to, work this video camera today and get the microphone working and everything. I was having all these problems, but when I was ready to start recording, everything worked. So everything was working just fine, and it all worked out. So everything was successful, and everything began working as it was supposed to work out. Now let's move on to and this is another great phrasal verb, to move on to something else. We're going to continue, we're moving this way, and now we're going to move on to something else, move on to the next topic. Another great phrasal verb. Remember these, remember these. So let's move on to the phrases where we're talking about things that are time related, as well as some other longer phrases and expressions from the conversation this month, where we're talking about milestones and life experiences and that kind of thing. So the first set, talking about time. The first one I want to cover, this is another prefix. Remember the prefix, just like the bicycle example. So by, meaning to, we've got pre, which means before. So pre. So when you preview something, it's like before you view something. Like a movie preview means before you actually watch the whole movie, they just show like a small clip of it. So like on when I'm recording this recently, in December of 2015, we have like a lot of previews for new movies, like the previews for the new Star Wars movie are coming out. So when you see this, the Star Wars movie will have already been out. Maybe you'll go see it. Maybe you enjoyed the movie. Maybe you didn't. But you can have a preview of that movie, so you can see something beforehand. So whenever you talk about pre, you can talk about like, before your baby is born, you can say, I'm pre-baby, or I'm pre something else, or even though it's not an actual word, like pre-baby is not a word, but you can have like, I'm pre-baby, or I'm pre-revenue. So this just means like before I'm making any money, you're kind of making a joke that like I'm pre-revenue. So revenue means money that you earn. So as a company, I'm pre-revenue. I'm not making any money yet, but I'm getting prepared to do that kind of thing. You'll also hear in the conversation preconception, which is an actual word. So to conceive or to think of something, this is to conceive of an idea, but a preconception. So often, in English we've got like to conceive, this is the verb, but a conception just means an idea. So that's the noun form of the same thing, to conceive, and a conception of something. So a preconception just means an idea you have of something before, you actually meet that thing. So just like a preview of a movie before you see the movie, a preconception of something Maybe before you meet someone or before you do something, you can say, I had a lot of preconceptions about this. So maybe if this is your first time doing a kind of distance learning program or learning like this without a teacher physically sitting in front of you, maybe you have preconceptions about how that would work. Or you have preconceptions about, maybe a certain party. So you were thinking the party was going to be bad because, it's maybe something you're not interested in, but you went to the party and you really enjoyed yourself. So you had preconceptions about things. These are like, remember, kind of before thoughts, preconceptions about something. It just means how you're thinking about it before that thing actually happens. Preconception. Next, we have two more fantastic conversational time expressions. The first one is ahead of time, and the second one is after the fact. So the first one, ahead of time, just means before. So I planned something before the meeting, but I planned something ahead of time. So ahead meaning before just means, again, it's the same thing. I planned something before the meeting, or I prepared for it before the meeting. This is, again, the textbook version of it, but to say I prepared ahead of time just means it's again, it's the same thing as before, but it's sounding more native and natural and conversational. So I was preparing for the test and I got ready ahead of time. So like maybe the meeting or the test or something is at 1 o'clock, but before the meeting, so ahead of the time when the meeting is, so ahead of that time or before that time, I was preparing or studying for that, so I was prepared. So I prepared ahead of time. Now the opposite of this is after the fact. So there's the event, if it's the meeting or the time or the whatever that thing is, like there's a party or a class or something. So ahead of time, and then you've got after the fact. So I studied ahead of time for the test. If you study after the fact, then you're not really going to help yourself because you're studying for a test after it happens. So you can say, like maybe a few people know a secret, something like that. Maybe like something in the stock market. So people know that this stock is going to go down or this stock is going to go up. So if you hear about it ahead of time, then you can buy that stock or sell that stock and make some money. But if you hear about it after the fact, then nobody's going to help you and you're not going to be helped in the situation. Ahead of time, after the fact. Next, to go back to something. To go back to a time or to talk about something in the past, you can talk about something. It goes back to something where, again, you're talking about a previous something that was said or talking about a previous experience or a previous situation. So we can be in the middle of a conversation. You and I are talking right now, and I say, oh, what we're talking about right now goes back to something we were talking about earlier. So, we're talking about, should we go to the apple picking, where we're going to pick apples off of trees. We're talking about that. But this topic, it goes back to what we were talking about last week, about picking like bananas off trees or something like that. So it just means you're taking something now and it's returning or connected to something in the past. It goes back to something that happened in the past. To go back to. Next, we have another great conversational expression, most of the time. In your English class, if you went to regular school, you probably learned things like never and maybe or seldom, sometimes and usually and always, that kind of thing. But we've also got kind of the natural native expressions that are fitting in here, and one of those is most of the time. So instead of usually, which is a perfectly good thing to say, native speakers will say, usually I do this, usually I do that, but often you'll also hear most of the time. I wake up on time most of the time. I usually eat dinner most of the time. So I'm usually eating dinner, or most of the time I eat dinner. Most of the time I eat dinner at 7 o'clock. But yesterday I ate dinner at 3 o'clock. So something was strange with my schedule. But most of the time, usually most of the time I do something, at this particular time or in this particular way. Most of the time. Listen carefully to how this blends. Most of the time. 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 Next, back then, back then. When you want to talk about in the past, a textbook will actually tell you in the past or many years ago, something like that. But the casual conversational native way of saying this is back then. So instead of saying, when I was a kid, we did something, you can just say, back then, we had to walk to school, we didn't have the internet, other things like that. So back then, after you're introducing something, you're talking about something that's way in the past, so many, many years ago. But after you say, well, millions of years ago, or you're introducing when specifically that time is. It could be 10 years ago, 20 years ago, a million years ago. But after you say that, you can just say, back then. So a million years ago, dinosaurs were walking around, or 65 million years ago, or something like that, whatever it is. And then after you've introduced that, then you can say, well, back then, the world was a different place. Back then, the world was a different place. Back then, there were no, internet connections or something like that. So back then, back then. Next, another great time expression, after so many years of X, or after so many days of X. So when you have to experience something for a long time, like as an example, I'm talking about studying in college, or I want to become a doctor. So after many years of becoming a doctor, or after many years of study, I'm talking about the whole distance, the whole time period. After many years of study, I finally became a doctor. After many months of waiting, my daughter was finally born. After many months of something, after many hours of sitting in pain, I was finished with the dentist, something like that. So after many years, after many hours, after many minutes or something like that, after a really long time, but this is a more casual way of saying this. So after many years of something, something happened. Next, you can talk about someone being around something or close to something when you're talking about their age. If you're talking about your own age and you know exactly how you are, as my mom does in the conversation, so you'll see that. She says she is 69 years old. So she knows how old she is. But if I'm talking about my mom, I would say, oh, she's close to 70, or she's around 70, or about 70 years old. Now, this is a thing that we will use in conversations when we're speaking generally. Oh, I think, I've been working for this company for about 50 years, or around 50 years, or close to 50 years. But the only time maybe you would be trying to use like maybe around or about, and maybe not use that actually, is when you're talking with a woman and you say, hey, like, how old are you? Or, you're talking about your mom or my mom, something like that. I wouldn't say, oh, she's around 70 years old, because, we want to like make her seem kind of younger than she actually is. So my mom wouldn't say, oh, I'm close to 70, I'm 69. So if I have a wife who is, 45 years old, I wouldn't say, oh, she's like, close to 50 or something. Then she would be upset about that. I'm not close to 50. I'm 45 years old, that kind of thing. So just be careful when you use this, but understand when it happens that you're around something, you're about something, or close to something. I've been teaching English like this for close to, 15 years, something like that. A really long time. Close to. Next, to go back and forth, to go back and forth. Now you can go back and forth in time, like you're time traveling, or you can go back and forth about an idea. Maybe I'm deciding if I want to see this movie or that movie, so I'm going back and forth like, this is a good movie, but that's a good movie too. I'm going back and forth about that. To go back and forth. I'm trying to decide if something is a good idea or not, or I'm trying to decide between two alternatives. I can have alternative 1 or alternative 2, choice 1 or choice 2. Which is the better one? I've been going back and forth about whether I should buy a new car or not. I've been going back and forth about whether I should go to graduate school or not. To go back and forth. To go back and forth. We can also have a conversation where you and I are going back and forth. So the conversation is starting here and then coming to me and then going back to you. We're going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Next, when it comes to. When it comes to. When it comes to is a great casual conversational phrase, and I've used this before, just means concerning. So when it comes to playing soccer, concerning playing soccer or about playing soccer, I'm actually really, really bad at it, actually. When I was younger, I was pretty good at soccer, but when it comes to playing soccer now, I'm actually really bad. I have bad knees and I can't even kick a ball anymore. So I can play basketball because I can use my hands for that, but after many years of soccer and baseball, my knees are just not very good anymore. So, when it comes to playing baseball or when it comes to playing soccer, I'm not very good. But when it comes to playing basketball, actually, I'm not really that good at basketball either, but I'm getting better. So when it comes to something, when it comes to talking about the economy, I actually know a lot about that. But when it comes to talking about, restaurants and things, I actually don't know very much about that. So when it comes to. And the last of our time expressions, from day one. From day one. This is a really great, fantastic even conversational phrase you can use when you're talking about from the very beginning of doing something. Like, I want you to be speaking from day one. I want you to be practicing from day one. I want you to be excited from day one when you start these lessons. So from day one is just, from the first day, but from day one, this is the most native and conversational way of saying that from the start of something, I was, excited, or I was happy, or I was sad, or, whatever the case may be, but from day one. And now we'll go over our last few expressions for this month. The first one is the cycle continues. The cycle continues. So my mom had me and I had my daughter Aria, and then the cycle goes on and on and on. So it's a cycle of generations, just like bicycle. All these words are coming back together. Bicycle, cycle, circle, bicycle, cycle. The cycle continues. So the cycle continues is just a great way of expressing that something is happening again, just as you expected it would be. So, if you're watching something, like, it could be a good thing that happens again or a bad thing that happens again. Maybe your team always loses or your team always wins a particular game or against a certain rival. So like the Chicago Cubs in America, where I'm from in Chicago. Actually, I just said that. Chicago Cubs from Chicago. Anyway. So where I'm from, the Chicago Cubs are like always losing. Now, sometimes they win, sometimes they have a good team. Actually, I haven't been following them lately, but maybe they're doing well, but they're probably not because, the cycle continues. The cycle continues. Like, they kind of get a little bit better and then they get worse again. So like a team like the Yankees or, some other teams that are like always good, something like that. Like, usually, they're always doing well. So there's not like a cycle of like doing bad and good and bad and good, something like that. They're just kind of always doing well. But a team that you expect to do well and then they do badly and then you expect them like this, it's a circle, a cycle. The cycle continues. Next, to navigate life. To navigate anything just means to decide a course and to move in that direction. So if I am the pilot of a ship or I am a pilot of an airplane, I am flying, I have to figure out where I'm going. I have to navigate. So it means to look at a map and figure out we are here. So again, to figure out, to solve, to understand, to figure out where you are and then where you want to go. So I have to navigate. Who wants to be the navigator? Who wants to choose where we go or to decide how we get there? To navigate. So you can physically navigate something, like I can navigate my way around a crowd of people. So I am standing here and my friend is over here, but there are a lot of people in the middle of the room. I have to navigate my way around the room. I have to find my way to him. This is a more natural and more, it's still kind of an advanced expression, but you can say that you're navigating your way to something in the same way that you can navigate life. So if you're able to navigate life well, like even if something bad happens, you can move around it or you can get over it or get past it somehow. And these are the expressions we talk about. So pretty much most things in life, most things in the language anyway, there is a physical origin for something, just like all those phrasal verbs that we covered before, like to turn on something or to turn off. That's a physical thing. Now, even though we push a button to turn something on or to turn something off, it comes from that when we would turn something one way or the other, to turn something. So now we can talk about to navigate something physical becomes to navigate something mental or to navigate life. So when you hear people talk about, she was able to navigate life very well, it just means she made good decisions and she was able to overcome obstacles, that kind of thing. To navigate life. Next, you can also talk about having a life change, a life change. So something that changes your life is a life change. Very easy to understand in the same way that, having a baby changes your life, or if you have to get a new job and you move to a different country, that changes your life. That is a life change, a life change, a life change. And related to this, because we've got the word life in there, the facts of life. Now, the facts of life, people get kind of embarrassed or nervous to talk about sex, or, especially if they're trying to teach their children, oh, this is how a baby is made. Or, when you're going into school and you're an elementary student, maybe you're like 10, 12, 13 years old. Usually you have sex ed or sex education in school where they teach you how to make a baby and how a baby is made in the physical body, and like men are like this and women are like this. This is called the facts of life, the facts of life. So when you talk about describing, like if I was explaining to you that my daughter is now like 10 years old and she's asking me, oh, where do babies come from? So I have to explain to her the facts of life. But we don't want to like explicitly say, oh, well, this is where babies come from, and you explain actually how to do it. You're talking about the facts of life, like, well, like the stork, this is like the bird like flies down and brings the baby, or something like that. Maybe to little children you would give that example. But all of these things are just saying you're talking about the facts of life, and it just means where babies come from and how, the cycle continues. How do we get new people on the planet? The facts of life, the facts of life. I'll probably have to explain the facts of life to my daughter when she gets old enough, the facts of life. And the last thing I'll leave you with for this lesson is great. When you're talking about generations of people, you can have, mother and father, and then the child, and then the grandchild, and then the great-grandchild. So you can keep going down like great-grandchild, great-great-grandchild, great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great, counting up like that. So the same way going back up, so your grandmother, your great-grandmother, like your uncle, your great-uncle, that kind of thing, your great-grand-uncle. So when you're talking about people, just put great, 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 great when you're talking about before that for people going up in generations and down in generations as well. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this lesson set and this the Fluency Corner lesson. I look forward to seeing you in the masterclass lesson as well. Be sure to review. As always, go back and watch this many times. Listen to it. Try to write it down and try to teach and to speak along with me. And then the words will slowly start getting into your mind, and you can start speaking and using them more confidently in conversations. Well, I will see you then. I hope you've had a fantastic time this month, and we'll see you in the next lesson. Bye-bye.